The 9,603rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Yemen to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Hans Grunberg, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen. Ms. Edem Vasurno, Director of Operations and Advocacy, Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And Ms. Wamdeh Shakir, Founder and Chairwoman, ITAR Foundation for Social Development. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Ms. Hans Grunberg.
Thank you, Madam President. Allow me to start by wishing Yemenis and Muslims around the world Eid Mubarak. Needless to say, we meet at a particularly dangerous moment in the Middle East. The need for broader regional de-escalation is acute. I share the Secretary General's alarm about the very real danger of region-wide escalation and his urging to all parties for maximum restraint. Sustained and enduring efforts towards fostering peaceful and stable relations are imperative for the well-being of the populations in the Middle East. This has long been evident in the case of Yemen and is a rightful demand that the Yemeni people deserve. We also meet just as the holy month of Ramadan has come to an end. In previous years, Ramadan provided an opportunity for the Yemeni parties to overcome differences, reinforce hope, and build confidence. 2 years ago, the parties agreed to a much welcome nationwide truce, which has ever since provided relative calm along the Yemeni front lines. And last year, over 900 detainees were released, allowing them to spend the Eid reunited with their families and loved ones. Regrettably, this year has not witnessed such scenes of celebration. Detainees we had hoped would be released in time to spend Eid with their loved ones remain in detention. Roads we had hoped to see open remain closed. We also witnessed the tragic killing and injury of 16 civilians, including women and children, when a residence was demolished by Ansar Allah individuals in Al-Baida governorate. Instead of narrowing differences and building confidence, Madam President, I am troubled by the apparent growing divergence between the parties. On the economic front, the parties are engaging in unilateral actions that risk further bifurcating the economic system. The disintegration of the currency in circulation in Ansar Allah-controlled areas presents a real economic problem for the Yemeni people, but reaching a solution is being severely complicated by the contested authority of the Central Bank of Yemen. The challenges facing the Yemeni economy require rather a strategic and coordinated response in line with the long-term settlement of the conflict. While the countrywide military situation remains contained in comparison to the situation before April 2022, we have recently seen an escalation of hostilities on several front lines, particularly in Al-Dala and Lahej. Troop movements, intermittent fighting, and exchanges of fire have also been reported in Hodeidah, Marib, Sada, Shabwa, and Taiz governorates. Madam President, what Yemenis ultimately need is a nationwide ceasefire, improved living conditions, and the resumption of an inclusive political process that meaningfully engages a wide variety of voices, including women, youth, civil society, and marginalized groups. My mediation approach has been focused on delivering exactly that. Last December, the parties took an important step by articulating to me their readiness to operationalize a set of commitments through a United Nations roadmap. Unfortunately, momentum towards an agreement was stalled by regional events, which have significantly complicated the mediation space. The escalation in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden having entered its 6th month, has continued with Ansarallah targeting commercial and military vessels, and the United States and the United Kingdom carrying out attacks on military targets in Hodeidah, Hajjaj, Sana'a, and Taiz. In the absence of a ceasefire in Gaza and a complete termination of attacks in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, the threat of further escalation persists. The recent developments involving Iran and Israel underscore the urgency of this matter. The region must, with the support of the international community, seek avenues for coexistence based on incremental trust building, mutual security, and a departure from the zero-sum mentality of achieving victory at the expense of others. Madam President, while the conflicts in Yemen and the wider region have become undeniably interlinked, I strongly believe that we owe it to the Yemenis to ensure that resolving the conflict in Yemen is not made contingent upon the resolution of other issues. We cannot risk Yemen's chance for peace becoming a collateral damage. Yemeni people, including the 17 million that remain dependent on humanitarian aid and for their survival, have suffered for too long already. Peace in Yemen has intrinsic value, and I'm convinced that a Yemen at peace with itself and its neighbors would have a positive impact on the regional dynamics. If we leave Yemen's political process in the waiting room and continue down this path of escalation, the consequences could be catastrophic, not only for Yemen, but also for the wider region. Engagement with the parties on the roadmap and its elements can help to open space for dialogue. I therefore continue to be in close touch with all sides to build confidence and find solutions. My office will continue to encourage and help the parties with the opening of roads, resolving difficult economic differences, making progress on the roadmap, and preparing for its implementation. We will also continue our work on the release of detainees, and in the meantime, I call on the parties to refrain from unilateral escalatory measures and engage in good faith dialogue under the auspices of the United Nations to find common solutions through collaboration and to turn disputes into opportunities to take the path towards common prosperity. Madam President, in my recent visits to Washington, Riyadh, Muscat, and Moscow, I underlined the need for de-escalation in the Red Sea and to remain focused on the long-term objectives for Yemen, namely an intra-Yemeni political process that results in a sustainable and just peace, addresses human suffering, and allows for reconstruction and economic prosperity. I was pleased to hear that across the board, my interlocutors continue to remain united in their support for these objectives. I will depend on this support and the support of this Council in the months ahead. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Mr. Grunberg for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Edem Vosurno.
Thank you, Madam President, and allow me to thank Special Envoy Grunberg for his continued tireless efforts to help the people of Yemen reach a lasting peace and for his update. This month marks 2 years since the United Nations brokered truce was announced, which provided precious relief for the humanitarian situation long past its expiry. Lower numbers of civilian casualties, eased trade restrictions, and increased imports of essential items, increased road and air connections, and some displaced people have been able to return to their homes. The crisis in and near the Red Sea continues to threaten progress and stability. For now, we are thankful that we have still not seen major implications for the humanitarian situation. As is well known, the main causes of large-scale needs in Yemen, in particular, the deteriorating economy, barely functioning public services, and protracted conflict-induced displacement are yet to be addressed. Public services and institutions continue to degrade, and economic indicators remain worrisome. The re-emergence of cholera and growing levels of severe malnutrition are telling indicators of the weakened capacity of social services. Almost 1 in every 2 children under 5 are stunted, more than double the global average. 49% compared to 21.3%. The most vulnerable people, including women and girls, marginalized groups such as the Muhammadin, internally displaced people, migrants, asylum seekers and refugees, and persons with disabilities still depend on humanitarian assistance to survive. And as we have often briefed the Council, humanitarians continue to operate in a very difficult environment. From December last year to February this year, aid agencies reported 137 access constraints. The majority were interference in humanitarian programming and movement restrictions in areas controlled by the Houthi de facto authorities, in particular for Yemeni women aid workers. I saw the impacts of these restrictions firsthand when I visited Yemen in March. Intergovernorate movements of our Yemeni female colleagues were denied in Houthi-controlled areas in the absence of a male guardian, limiting our engagement with women and girls. In areas controlled by the government of Yemen, insecurity and fragmented administrative requirements, including the approval of sub-agreements, continue to delay our response. And lastly, we continue to struggle with a concerning deficit in funding for the 2024 humanitarian appeal, despite extensive work by the humanitarian community to prioritize the response and reduce the appeal from $4.3 billion in 2023 to $2.7 billion in 2024. The appeal is only 10% funded as we enter the second quarter of the year. Madam President, members of the Council, as we have previously briefed, the Council, the humanitarian community in Yemen, is transforming our response to adapt to the shifting realities in Yemen. This transformation is taking place in different ways. Please allow me to outline a few. We are promoting a locally driven response and more sustainable solutions for the people of Yemen, in close collaboration with our development partners and affected communities. We are reviewing the way we operate in Yemen to ensure we remain fit for purpose and able to meet emerging challenges. We are working to further improve targeting to better direct assistance to those in need. The United Nations World Food Programme's ongoing retargeting efforts, which I will discuss in more detail shortly, are indeed a critical first step. We are redoubling our efforts to ensure a principled and measured approach to humanitarian action and expand operational space, and actively advocating against politicization of our work. And we are pursuing more structured engagement with all parties and seeking systemic solutions to persisting challenges. Madam President, I would like to provide more detail about two particular issues that are most urgent to the humanitarian community today. One of them is cholera, and the other is food and nutrition insecurity. Since October last year, we have been seeing an alarming resurgence of cholera across the country. The last outbreak was in 2019. The response in government-controlled areas, led by the government with the support of the humanitarian community, has slowed the spread of the disease and ensured the availability of treatment for people affected. This work was boosted by a Yemen Humanitarian Fund allocation in November and generous donor support for the outbreak response. However, since March, we have seen the outbreak spread rapidly in areas controlled by the Houthi de facto authorities. As of 7 April, more than 11,000 suspected cases have been reported in these areas, with 75 associated deaths, compared with approximately 3,200 suspected cases in government-controlled areas, also since October. As shown by the success in curbing the outbreak in government-controlled areas, a rapid response is absolutely critical. The United Nations and our humanitarian partners are working closely with relevant authorities to scale up the response. However, Emergency stocks of supplies, essential supplies, are almost depleted. Water and sanitation and hygiene support systems need urgent strengthening. We appeal to the international community to help us to fill these urgent gaps, including, of course, with critical funding and supplies. Madam President, we have repeatedly voiced our strong concerns about food and nutrition insecurity in Yemen this year. Ramadan and Eid festivities have seen some small, temporary, but welcome relief with zakat, Islamic charity obligations, remittances, and community-led mechanisms, providing more people with access to essential items and the ability to purchase food in the markets. We expect food and nutrition security to worsen, though, further as the lean season begins in the coming weeks. Our efforts to address this situation continue apace. The World Food Programme's pilot retargeting exercise is now underway in Houthi-controlled areas, and we expect to see positive results by the end of the month. Until food assistance starts flowing, the humanitarian country team and its partners are doing what they can to mitigate the most severe impacts of the pause in general food distribution and protect the most vulnerable. Nutrition interventions will be scaled up in 34 districts, assessed to be the worst affected, with the support of a $6 million allocation from the Yemen Humanitarian Fund. NGOs will distribute pre-positioned nutrition supplies in these districts. The needs, however, remain tremendous, and the United Nations and its partners require significantly more to keep hunger at bay. Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, Yemen needs three things today. One, we must keep front of mind how easily progress achieved since the truce could be lost, and how much more there is to do in a complex operating environment. I urge the Security Council to redouble its efforts to secure lasting peace and stability in Yemen. Two, with food and malnutrition rates rising and the cholera outbreak quickly worsening, we must be able to act quickly to minimize suffering and prevent further deterioration of conditions. The active, united support of Council members is crucial to create an enabling environment to help us carry out this work. And finally, I urge Council members to do what they can to provide urgently needed funding to aid the program in Yemen, to ensure the well-being of millions of Yemeni and support the steps the humanitarian community is taking to improve the effectiveness of our response. In closing, allow me also to warmly wish Eid Mubarak to all those who celebrate in Yemen and around the world today. I thank you.
I thank Ms. Wasserna for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Wamid Shakir.
السيدة الرئيسة المعالي الأعضاء والعضوات
Madam President,
الحاضرون
Excellencies,
جميعا
ladies
أنا
and
وميد
gentlemen,
شاكر
my
رئيسة
name
مؤسسة
is
إطار
Wamid Shakir and I am
للتنمية
the chairwoman
الاجتماعية
of
وهي منظمة
the
غير
Itar
حكومية
Foundation for
يمنية
Social Development. It's a
تعمل
Yemeni
على تطوير
organization
قطاع المجتمع المدني
dedicated
من
to
أجل
promoting
تمكين
the
النساء والشباب بناء السلام
rights and
وتحقيق
participation of women
المساواة
and youth,
الاجتماعية.
building peace and achieving social and
أقف
gender
أمامكم
equality
اليوم
in
بقلب
the Yemeni
مثقل
civil society. I stand before you today with a
ساعية
heavy heart,
بجذب اهتمامكم إلى الأزمة
pleading
في اليمن
for your
التي
attention
طال
to the
أمدها
ongoing crisis in
بسبب
Yemen
الحرب
that has unfolded for so
وسببت
long
دماراً
because of the
كبيراً
war,
لكثير
causing
من
great
اليمنيين
devastation
وخاصة
to many Yemenis,
النساء والطفلات
particularly women,
والأطفال.
girls,
أود أن
and
أحدثكم اليوم
children.
عن 3 نقاط
I would
رئيسية.
like to focus
أولاً
on three main
آثار
points today.
الأزمة الإنسانية
First,
والاقتصادية
the
على حياة النساء
gendered
والأطفال
impact of the humanitarian and economic crisis and its
التغير
impact on
المناخي
children as
على
well.
حياة النساء
Second, the
والطفلات
impacts of climate
والأطفال
change,
كذلك، ودور
particularly on
المجتمع
women, girls,
المدني
and
بما في
boys.
ذلك منظمات حقوق
And
المرأة
third, the role of civil
والمنظمات التي
society,
تقودها
including
النساء،
women's rights and women-led
وأهمية
organizations,
مشاركتها
and the
الفاعلة
importance
في
of
عملية
their full,
السلام
equal,
والعملية
and
السياسية.
meaningful participation in the peace and political
السيدة
process.
الرئيسة، تسبب النزاع
Madam
في اليمن
President, the
بأزمة
conflict in Yemen
إنسانية
has
مدمرة،
unleashed a
تاركاً
devastating
17
humanitarian
مليون
crisis,
يمني
leaving 17
يعانون
million
من انعدام
Yemenis
الأمن الغذائي،
suffering
بينما
from
يقف
food
6
insecurity,
ملايين منهم على عتبة
while
الجوع.
6 million are on
تتحمل
the
النساء
precipice of
والأطفال
famine.
وطأة هذه الأزمة،
Women and children
إذ
are bearing the
يشكلون
brunt of this
80%
crisis,
من
as
المحتاجين
they
إلى
comprise
المساعدات
almost
الإنسانية.
80% of those
في
in need of
الوقت
humanitarian
نفسه
assistance. In the
انخفضت
meantime,
قيمة العملة،
the value of
مما
the currency
تسبب في
has dropped,
ارتفاع أسعار
thus
المواد
causing food
الغذائية
prices to
بأكثر من 300%،
increase by over 300% and
للقمح
400%
فقط.
for wheat alone.
اليوم لا
Today,
تستطيع أكثر من نصف
more
الأسر
than
في اليمن
half
من توفير
of
الضروريات
households in Yemen
اليومية،
cannot afford
ويتفاقم وضعهم
daily
سوءاً
necessities.
مع انقطاع التيار
Matters are made
الكهربائي
worse
وشح
because
المياه
of power
وتأخر
outages,
دفع الأجور.
water scarcity, and
يؤدي
unpaid
الانهيار
wages.
الاقتصادي إلى
The
إرهاق
economic
النساء
collapse
اليمنيات بشكل
disproportionately
مضاعف،
burdens
فارتفاع
Yemeni women.
الأسعار وارتفاع أسعار المواد الغذائية
Soaring
وتضاءل
food
الموارد
prices
يجبر
and
النساء
dwindling
على
resources
تخطي الوجبات
are forcing
الغذائية
women
أو
to
بيع
skip meals or
ممتلكاتهن.
sell their belongings.
ويهدد سوء التغذية أكثر من
Malnutrition
مليون
threatens
ونصف امرأة
over
حامل
2.7
ومرضع.
million pregnant and
كما أن
breastfeeding women.
المحادثات المتوقفة للسلام
The
واستمرار
stalled
القتال
peace talks
يزيد من
and
تعقيد
the
الوضع،
ongoing fighting
وهناك
are
استبعاد
further worsening
النساء
the
عن
situation.
عمليات صنع
Women are
القرار،
being
فعلى
excluded from
الرغم
decision
من
making,
تحملهن
despite the fact that they bear
وطأة النزاع
the brunt of the conflict.
ليس لهن رأي بعد
Yet they
في
still
هذا
have
كله.
no voice in ending it.
تخطي الوجبات وتسرب
Skipping
الأطفال من
meals,
المدارس
children
والزواج
dropping out of
المبكر
school,
وعمالة الأطفال
child
والتسول
marriage,
كلها أمثلة
child labor,
بسيطة أو
and
قليلة
begging on
على
the streets
استراتيجيات التكيف
are some of the
الخطيرة
high-risk
التي
coping strategies
يلجأ
that
إليها
millions in
اليمنيون
Yemen have had
للقضاء
to
للبقاء على الحياة.
resort to survive.
اضطرت ملايين الفتيات إلى ترك
Millions of
الدراسة
girls have
للعمل
had
من أجل
to
توفير الطعام
drop out of school
لعائلاتهن.
to work and provide
من
food for
بين
their
10
families.
مليون و700
Out of
ألف طفل في سن
10.7 million
الدراسة يوجد
school-aged
4
children in
مليون
Yemen,
ونصف طفل
4.5
خارج
million
المدرسة،
children are out of
70
school,
منهم فتيات.
70% of whom
أما
are
الأطفال
girls.
النازحون فمعرضون
Displaced
للتسرب
children
من
are
المدرسة
twice as
بمعدل
likely to drop
الضعف
out
عن نظرائهم،
than their peers.
ويؤدي تسرب الفتيات من التعليم إلى ارتفاع
The lack of
معدلات
access to
الزواج
education
المبكر
for
والقسري،
girls has
خاصة
raised
بين
the
الفتيات
rates of
النازحات،
forced
إذ
early child
تتزوج
marriage,
حاليا
particularly for
اليوم
displaced girls, where
واحدة
one
فتاة نازحة من كل
out of
5 في
5
سن 10
displaced girls
سنوات إلى 19 سنة،
is currently
وهو
married between the
عدد
ages of
أعلى
10 and
بكثير
19, which
من
is a
معدل
significantly
الزواج
higher
في
number
المجتمع
than the typical
المضيف.
marriage age in the
إن
host
توفير التمويل
community.
العاجل أمر ملح لمنع
Urgent
كارثة إنسانية وخيمة في
funding is
اليمن.
crucial in
على
preventing
المانحين
a
دعم المجتمع
humanitarian
المدني
catastrophe in
المحلي
Yemen.
لا سيما
Donors must support
المنظمات
local civil
النسائية
society, especially women's rights
بتمويل
groups,
طويل الأجل،
with long-term
ذلك
funding.
لتعزيز قدرة القادة
This
المحليين
empowers
على
local
الوصول إلى
leaders
الفئات
to reach
الأكثر
the
ضعفا.
most vulnerable.
السيدة الرئيسة،
Madam President,
يضيف تغير المناخ طبقة أخرى من
climate
الدمار
change
إلى
adds
الكارثة
another
الإنسانية،
layer of
وتبرز
devastation
آثار
to the
تغير
humanitarian
المناخ على
catastrophe.
اليمن في انعدام الأمن
Yemen's
الغذائي
vulnerability to
وشح
climate
المياه
change
والنزوح.
translates into food
يهدد
insecurity, water
هطول
scarcity,
الأمطار
and
غير
displacement,
المنتظمة
erratic
وارتفاع
rainfall
درجات
patterns,
الحرارة
rising
وانخفاض مستويات
temperatures,
المياه
and
الجوفية
declining
الأمن
groundwater levels
الغذائي
threaten food
لملايين
security
الأشخاص
for
الذين
millions
يعتمدون
who
على الزراعة
rely
في
on
معيشتهم.
agriculture for their
ثلث المياه
livelihoods.
الجوفية
A
والسطحية
third of
في
Yemen's
اليمن على
groundwater
وشك
and surface
النضوب،
water is on the
حيث
verge of
تصل آبار
depletion.
المياه إلى عمق يزيد عن
Water wells
700
are
متر.
reaching depths of
يؤثر
over
هذا
700
بشكل
meters.
مضاعف على
All of this
النساء والفتيات
disproportionately
اللاتي
affects women
يلعبن
and girls
دورا
who
رئيسيا
play
في
a
إنتاج
crucial
الغذاء
role in food
وجمع
production
المياه
and household
لاحتياجات
water
المنزل.
collection and
ناهيك
management.
حقيقة أن النساء يملكن أقل من 1%
Moreover,
من
women own
الأراضي
less than
الزراعية
1%
وبالتالي المياه،
of farming
فهذا
land
يعيق
and
من
thus water, and
قدرتهن
this
على
hinders their
التكيف
ability to
مع
adapt
تغير المناخ
to climate
والوصول
change
إلى الموارد.
and access resources.
في
In
2023
2023,
تأثر بتغير المياه تغير المناخ أكثر من
climate
300,000
change
شخص
affected over
في اليمن،
300,000 people in
معظمهم
Yemen,
من النازحين
most of
الذين
whom
فروا
are
من
IDPs who
من
had
مناطق
fled
النزاع، ثم فقدوا
conflict areas
مأواهم
and then lost their
ودخلهم
shelters,
وسبل عيشهم.
income, and any
هذا ما
form of
يفعله
livelihood.
تغير المناخ في اليمن
This is
في
what
ظل
climate
الأزمة
change does
الحالية.
in Yemen in light of
يفاقم
the current
النزوح
crisis. It
ويجبر
exacerbates
الملايين على
displacement,
ترك
it forces
منازلهم
millions to flee their
بحثا
homes
عن
in
الماء
search of
والغذاء
water,
والأمان.
food, and
هناك
safety.
4.5 مليون
4.5
يمني نازح
million
بسبب
Yemenis are
الكوارث
internally
الطبيعية،
displaced
إلا
due
أن
to
النساء
natural
والفتيات هن
disasters.
الأكثر
Women and
تأثرا
girls
بتغير
are
المناخ كذلك
affected more
العنف
than others
والأمراض.
by climate
في
change,
مؤسسة
violence,
إطار
and disease. At the
عملنا
ITAR
مؤخرا
Foundation,
مع
we have recently worked with
460 امرأة نازحة
460
وعلينا
internally
منهن
displaced
أن
women
طفح المجاري
who informed us that
والمستنقعات
sewage
والأمطار
overflow,
الغزيرة
swamps, heavy
والفيضانات
rainfall, flooding,
والتلوث
and
الصناعي
industrial
وخاصة
pollution,
من قبل
especially
شركات النفط
from oil
هي أكثر
companies,
القضايا
are the
شيوعا
most
في مناطقهن.
frequent
تضطر
issues and
المجتمعات
problems in
وخاصة
the areas,
النساء إلى
communities,
اعتماد
especially
آليات
women, are
تكيف
forced
سلبية
to adopt
للبقاء على
negative
قيد
coping
الحياة، مثل
mechanisms to
تقليل
survive,
الإنفاق على
such as
الاحتياجات
reducing
الصحية
spending on health
والنزوح
needs,
إلى أماكن أكثر أمانا
being forcibly
واللجوء إلى
displaced to
الاغتراب.
safer places,
قالت هؤلاء
and
النسوة إن
resorting to
جل ما
borrowing.
يتطلعن إليه
These women
هو
said
ثلاثة
that
أمور:
their three
المأوى،
highest
الخدمات
aspirations were
المستدامة والسلام
shelter,
الدائم.
more sustainable
على
services,
الرغم من
and the last
آثاره
thing, peace.
المدمرة لا تعتبر السلطات
Despite
تغير
the
المناخ
devastating effects,
أولوية.
authorities do not consider
يتطلب
climate change a
التخفيف
priority.
من آثار تغير المناخ
Mitigating the effects
برامج
of climate
تنموية
change requires
طويلة الأجل
long-term development
وتمويل
programs.
وفير
It
وخبرات
requires abundant
متخصصة.
funding and
في كل
specialized
هذا غائب
expertise,
تقريبا،
all of which are almost
ويستحيل
entirely
تحقيقه في
absent
ظل النزاع
and impossible to
والهشاشة
achieve in the
السياسية القائمة في
shadow
اليمن.
of the conflict
على
and
الرغم
political
من أن
fragility of the
الخطط
country.
الوطنية للتكيف المناخي
Although existing climate
تعترف
change
بالحاجة إلى
adaptation plans
مشاركة
do
المجتمع
recognize the
المدني
need
والمجتمعات
for civil
المحلية،
society and
إلا
local
أنها
community
تفتقر إلى
engagement,
آليات
they
تنفيذ
lack
مستجيبة للنوع الاجتماعي والشباب.
gender and
من
use-responsive
الضروري أن تعكس
implementation
السياسات
mechanisms.
والمشاريع الرامية
It is
إلى معالجة
imperative
تغير
that
المناخ
policies,
احتياجات
strategies, and
النساء
projects to
والفتيات
address climate
وخبرتهن
change
وتطلعاتهن
reflect
في
the
هذا
needs,
المجال.
expertise, and aspirations
السيدة
of women
الرئيسة،
and girls.
تلعب النساء
Madam
دورا
President,
حاسما في بناء
women
السلام
play a
والتماسك
critical role in
الاجتماعي،
peace building
إلا
and
أن
social cohesion,
أصواتهن مفقودة
yet their
من
voices are
على
missing
طاولة صنع القرار.
from the
أطراف
decision-making
التفاوض لديهم
table.
سجل
The
محبط
negotiating parties
فيما
have a
يتعلق
dismal record
بإشراك
when
النساء،
it comes to women's
ومن
inclusion.
المثير للقلق أن
Alarmingly,
تمثيل النساء
the
يتراجع
representation
على
of
جميع
women is
المستويات،
declining
وما
at all
تزال
levels, and their
مشاركتهن في عملية
participation
السلام
in the
ضئيلة،
peace process remains
فتمثيل النساء
negligible.
منخفض أو
Women are
منعدم في الكيانات
underrepresented in
السياسية
the political
للحكومة
entities of the
والأحزاب
government
السياسية،
and
وكذلك في
political
عملية
parties,
فض النزاع على المستويين
as well as
الإقليمي
those
والعالمي.
engaged in the conflict
بالإضافة فإن
at
قيادة
regional and
النساء
global levels.
داخل منظمات المجتمع المدني
Women's leadership
منخفضة
within civil
أيضا،
society
وتواجه
organizations is also
صعوبات في الوصول
low,
إلى
and they
التمويل وتنمية
face
القدرات.
difficulties in accessing
المجتمع اليمني
funding
خاصة
and
المنظمات النسائية
capacity
هو العمود
building.
الفقري للجهود
Civil
الإنسانية
society,
والتنموية
especially women's
والسلام.
rights and
تقدم
women-led
هذه
organizations, are the
المنظمات
backbone of Yemeni
المساعدة
humanitarian
الإنسانية
peace and development
الأساسية،
efforts.
وتدعو
They
إلى سلام
provide
شامل
essential
وعادل،
humanitarian
وتمكن
assistance.
النساء
They
والشباب.
advocate for
ومع
just and
ذلك
inclusive
فإن
peace
مجال
and
عملهم
empower women and
يتقلص
youth.
يوما بعد
However,
يوم،
their
حيث
space
يؤدي
is
استمرار
shrinking
النزاع
by the
والقيود
day.
على
The ongoing
الحركة
conflict
والانخفاض
and
الحاد في
restrictions of
التمويل إلى
movement and the
تطوير
sharp decline in
مساهمتهم.
funding
إن
further
إعطاء الأولوية
undermine their
للمساواة
crucial
بين الجنسين
contributions.
والقيادة
Therefore, it is
المحلية
crucial
للمرأة
to
اليمنية في
prioritize
الجهود
gender
الإنسانية
equality and local
والتنموية
women's leadership
وبناء السلام
in
هو أمر
humanitarian
ضروري.
development and peace-building efforts.
السيدة
Madam President,
الرئيسة، اليمنيون واليمنيات هم في
Yemeni
أمس
men
الحاجة
and
اليوم
women
إلى سلام
desperately
دائم
need
يحمي
a
حقوق
lasting
الإنسان.
peace that
إن
protects their
تجديد
human rights.
الجهود نحو بناء السلام واعتبار دور المجتمع المدني
Renewed
والمنظمات
efforts
النسائية
towards peace
في
building
مقدمة
are
صفوف
crucial,
بناة
with civil
السلام
society and women's rights
أمر مهم
organizations
للغاية،
at
وبه
the
يمهد
forefront.
الطريق لمستقبل
This can
آمن
pave the
لجميع
way for a
اليمنيين.
secure future for
وعليه
all Yemenis.
أحث مجلس الأمن
Therefore,
على
I urge the
واحد:
Security Council
دعوة
to do the
جميع
following.
الأطراف إلى احترام وحماية
Call on all
حقوق
parties to
الإنسان
respect and
لجميع
protect
اليمنيين
the human rights of
واليمنيات
all
وفقا
Yemeni men and
للقانون
women
الدولي. مساءلة
in
الدول
accordance
الأعضاء
with
في الأمم
international law.
المتحدة بشأن حقوق
Hold
المرأة
United Nations member
وأطر المرأة
states
والشباب
to
والسلام
account for
والأمن
upholding
وتوفير
principles and
بيئة
rights-based
تمكن المجتمع
frameworks around
المدني من
women, peace and
المشاركة في صنع
security,
قرارات
and youth peace
السلام
and
والأمن
security,
على جميع
contributing to
المستويات لضمان
inclusive peace
المشاركة
processes
الفاعلة
that guarantee
لجميع
the full,
اليمنيين.
equal, and meaningful
حث الجهات
participation of all
المانحة على
Yemenis,
تمويل خطة
including women
الاستجابة
and youth.
الإنسانية
Urge
بشكل
donors to
عاجل
fund a
وكامل
humanitarian
في
response
اليمن
plan
مع
urgently and
توفير
fully in
تمويل
Yemen with
مباشر
direct, flexible, and
ومرن
multi-year
متعدد
funding
السنوات المنظمات
to women's
النسائية
rights and
حث
women-led
جميع جميع الأطراف على اتخاذ خطوات
urge all
ملموسة
parties
لمعالجة
to the
الأزمة
conflict to take
الاقتصادية
concrete steps
المستمرة
to address the
والتخفيف
ongoing
من
economic
حدة
crisis,
الفقر
alleviate
والحفاظ على
poverty,
كرامة
and
الشعب
preserve the
اليمني.
dignity of the
حث
Yemeni
الأطراف
people.
في اليمن على رفع
Urge
جميع
the
القيود
parties in
المفروضة
Yemen
على
to lift
حركة
all
النساء
restrictions
اليمنية
on the movement of
والعاملات
Yemeni
في المجال
women
الإنساني وفي بناء السلام
and female
ويشمل هذا
workers in
تسهيل عمل
humanitarian and
المنظمات المحلية
peace-building
والدولية.
areas. This includes
حث جميع
facilitating the
أطراف
work of local
النزاع
and
في اليمن
international
على
organizations.
معالجة أزمة
Urge all
المناخ
parties to the conflict in
بشكل
Yemen
ملموس
to
من خلال
address
تعزيز
the
الحكم
climate
الرشيد
crisis,
وبناء القدرات
including by
المؤسسية
enhancing good governance,
وتمكين
building
ومشاركة
institutional
المجتمع
capacity, and
المدني.
empowering civil society
شكرا لكم.
participation. I thank you.
I thank Ms. Shakir for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And let me start by thanking Special Envoy Grunberg and Director Wasunu for your briefings. And I'm also grateful to Ms. Shakir for highlighting the connections between climate, peace and security, as well as the stark humanitarian situation. As you said, and we've heard, Yemen faces stark environmental challenges on top of the ongoing conflict. And addressing these environmental challenges now, as part of any discussion for peace, will be critical to Yemen's future sustainability. We also share Director Wasonu and Ms. Shakir's concerns about the humanitarian situation in Yemen, and in particular, the access constraints preventing women aid workers from delivering vital assistance. We reiterate our call for all parties to facilitate unhindered access for humanitarian workers and welcome OCHA's proposals for adaptive measures, which Ms. Wasonu has just outlined. The UK has given over $1.2 billion in humanitarian aid since the crisis started. We gave $110 million last year, and we expect to increase our contribution this year. We also continue to support fully the ongoing efforts of the Special Envoy Hans Grunberg to progress a roadmap towards UN-led Yemeni dialogue. As we've said before, an inclusive political settlement is the only way to bring sustainable peace and long-term stability to Yemen and address the worsening humanitarian crisis. President, we unequivocally condemn the Iranian strikes against Israel over the weekend, which have done nothing to advance prospects for peace in Gaza. The UK has long been clear about Iran's unacceptable role in destabilising the region, including their role in supporting the Houthis in Yemen. We understand the Houthis contributed to this latest attack. Their reckless actions continue to risk seriously undermining efforts to bring peace to the Yemeni people. The Houthis continue to risk further escalation with their ongoing attacks against shipping in the Red Sea. This Council has been clear in its adoption of UNSCR 2722 on the 10th of January that we condemn Houthi attacks. They threaten innocent lives, endanger aid delivery to Yemen and the region. We also reaffirm our condemnation of the attack on a home in Radar last month by the Houthis. This attack led to a tragic loss of life and injury, and we express our deepest condolences to the families of those killed and injured. Furthermore, the decision to issue counterfeit currency in Yemen threatens to destabilise the banking sector and deepen division in the country's already fragile economy. Finally, President, we call on the Houthis to prioritise the interests of the Yemeni people, to engage with UN efforts to resolve economic fragmentation, and to cease provocations in order to preserve space for an intra-Yemeni peace process. In short, we call on the Houthis to stop attacks and to return to the peace talks. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom, and I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Madam President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3+ members, namely Algeria, Guyana, Mozambique, and my country, Sierra Leone. We thank Special Envoy Hans Grunberg and Director Idem Mosono for their briefings. We also thank Ms. Wamner Sakir for the information provided. The A3 Plus reiterates its support for the resumption of a Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned peace process based on the agreed references for political settlement. The attainment of an inclusive nationwide ceasefire is thus an imperative for the peace process to thrive. This is a priority that must be pursued. In this vein, sustained initiatives and the mutual exchange of prisoners, for instance, can rekindle efforts to build confidence and leverage the parties to honor their commitment to the peace process. We are of the view that the Special Envoy's vision for a bottom-up approach in canvassing much-needed support from the relevant stakeholders will serve as a linchpin in the mediation efforts. The facilitating role of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Sultanate of Oman, and the active involvement of the parties, civil society, women's group, and the youth are crucial to achieving this aspiration. We call on the parties not to allow the escalating situation in the Red Sea to deviate attention from effectively implementing the peace process. We urge the Houthis to resume their engagement and to participate constructively in the ongoing efforts led by the Special Envoy and other regional and international initiatives to successfully implement the peace process. Concrete gains made by the government and the Houthis, such as the opening of roads in the Thais Governorate, are key to cementing future collaborations. Furthermore, we call on the Houthis to refrain from any measures that may negatively impact economic activities in Yemen, and for them to provide assurances that allow traders the freedom to import commodities through all Yemeni ports. Facilitating free movement of goods would significantly contribute to mitigate the humanitarian crisis and allow the government to adequately fulfill its duties for the benefit of all Yemeni people, including through the payment of salaries. Madam President, Yemen is faced with a dire humanitarian situation with increased food insecurity and malnutrition. In government-controlled areas, the number of people receiving aid and the size of food rations have reduced. However, humanitarian needs remain widespread. According to the World Food Programme, 18.6 million Yemenis would need humanitarian assistance in 2024, and 17 million people are food insecure. The WFP estimates that it will need 2.9 billion in 2024 to meet those needs. We therefore welcome the CRF allocation of 7 million last month to bridge the WFP funding gap and tackle urgent food security and malnutrition challenges in Yemen. The A3 Plus therefore calls on the international community, the non-traditional donors such as philanthropic organizations, to scale up funding to support the effort of the WFP to cover the remaining 100 million funding gap so that the organization could resume and sustain food distribution across Yemen. We also call for the establishment of sustainable financing programs that will stimulate economic growth and support small and medium-sized enterprises, including through enhanced support for women-owned businesses and facilitate trade between the North and South, such as women-led microcredit schemes. Madam President, the A3 Plus members are appalled by the attack against civilians and the destruction of residential homes in Rada, in the Al-Bayada Governorate during the holy month of Ramadan that resulted in 12 deaths and 35 injuries. The A3 Plus calls for the cessation of the Houthis' military attack in different areas in Yemen, including the attacks on commercial and merchant vessels in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The A3 Plus further calls for assurances for the safety of ships that are carrying humanitarian aid and foodstuffs to Yemen ports to alleviate the humanitarian crisis faced by the people of Yemen. The A3 Plus stresses the need to address the root causes of the conflict and calls all concerned actors to exercise maximum restraint and for them to prioritize political and diplomatic means over military options to resolve the conflict to ensure lasting peace in Yemen and the region. In conclusion, Madam President, it is imperative to avoid a regional spillover of the Gaza conflict and to de-escalate tensions in the wider region of the Middle East, including in Yemen. We call on all relevant stakeholders to build on efforts for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. The people of Yemen deserve a united country that is in peace and thriving economically. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone, and I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you, and thanks also to today's briefers, Special Envoy Grunberg, Executive Director for SORNO, and Ms. Shakir. I also note the presence of the Yemeni ambassador today with us. President, I begin by once again stating Slovenia's commitment to long-term peace in Yemen and our support to the ongoing UN efforts to that end. The vision of the Special Envoy for the ceasefire and the roadmap leading to an inclusive political process in Yemen is the best possible chance for achieving peace after 9 long years of war. We must not lose sight of the ultimate aim. We call on all parties to engage constructively with the Special Envoys and to prioritize de-escalation and dialogue at a very fragile time for Yemen and the region in the turmoil of the catastrophe unfolding in Gaza. We reiterate our support to the internationally recognized government of Yemen and congratulate His Excellency Zindani on his appointment as Foreign Minister. We furthermore emphasize the importance of an effective and united Presidential Leadership Council. All parties must actively prepare for an intra-Yemeni political process, which we hope can commence in the very near future. The process in which women will fully, equally, and meaningfully participate. And we once again clearly call for the immediate cessation of Houthis' attack, which have continued in the Red Sea and which undermine peace efforts as demanded in Resolution 2722. The attacks reported against civilian homes in Al-Bayara Governorate in recent weeks are also deeply shocking and should fully be investigated. President, we have heard today that humanitarian needs in Yemen remain alarmingly high. While Ramadan brought some respite, food insecurity and malnutrition have surged in recent months, posing a real threat to the lives and well-being of millions of Yemenis, particularly women and children. Ensuring that humanitarian aid is available and accessible is the foremost priority. We welcome the commencing of a pilot targeting exercise by the World Food Programme and hope that it will be possible to resume broader food distribution soon. We reiterate our strong support to the work of OCHA and agencies on the ground, as well as for UNVIM, which is crucial in ensuring Yemenis have access to the food they so desperately need. Meeting Yemen's humanitarian needs is a necessary first step that has to be followed by long-term sustainable solutions underpinned by lasting peace. President, our civil society briefer today has made abundantly clear that climate change is exacerbating an already dire humanitarian situation, affecting the availability of critical resources for Yemenis, displacing them time and time again, and driving local-level tensions and conflict. As we fast approach the rainy season, we know that Yemenis, like Ms. Shakir, are once again fearing terrible flooding, like we have witnessed in recent years. Meanwhile, every drop of water is precious in Yemen, one of the world's most water-scarce countries. Regrettably, the absence of appropriate infrastructure means rainwater is not harvested for water supply. This is why the European Union is supporting sustainable initiatives on the ground to improve water access and humanitarian efforts which prioritize emergency preparedness and response. We call on the government of Yemen to ensure that its policies, including at the local level, are inclusive and sensitive to natural resource management and the many climate and water-related challenges the country is facing. President, in conclusion, we hope that the political will of all actors in Yemen and much-needed de-escalation in the region, the momentum needed to once again move forward on the path to peace in Yemen, can soon be restored. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia, and I give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. To begin, I also would like to thank Special Envoy Grunberg Director Worsening of OCHA, and Ms. Shakir, the founder of ITAR Foundation, for their briefings today. These briefings helps inform our understanding of recent development in Yemen on the ground. Madam President, our efforts to advance a political solution in Yemen have slowed since last October, despite the Special Envoy's continuous endeavors for political settlement in Yemen. The situation on the Red Sea impacts our endeavors to achieve peace in Yemen and is intensively affected by the recent elevated tensions in the broader region. Escalation in a broader region is very acute at this moment. Regrettably, the Houthis are aggravating the tension further beyond the Red Sea. We recall that the Special Envoy urged a reset on the calculation on the Yemeni questions. But again, regrettably, there has been no major change in Yemen over the last month. While progress has stalled, as briefer said, civilians continue to suffer due to ongoing security and an economic crisis, in addition to environmental issues recently. My delegation reiterates its consistent commitment for the support for the UN Special Envoy and notes the vital importance of full implementation of Resolution 2722 by all member states. To assist our overall efforts, the Sanctions Committee on Yemen will keep closely monitoring the sanctions regime. In particular, the arms embargo under Resolution 2216, with the support and the cooperation of the panel of experts on Yemen. Madam President, besides the political and security situation in Yemen, we must also take note of the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Yemen. The overall picture remains deeply concerning, given that humanitarian agencies are short of funds. Malnutrition figures remain high, in particular for children under age 2. Food insecurity and the lack of nutrition jeopardize the survival of vulnerable groups in the country, especially in Houthi-controlled area. I also listened very seriously on the briefings of the cholera outbreak in Yemen. In this regard, my delegation has high expectations for the WFP pilot exercise to provide relief to the hardships the Yemeni people are facing, which would be estimated to aggravate until August. Madam President, economic issues are inherently interconnected with the security issues, as the Houthis have attempted to deter the government's oil production, which has in turn worsened the government's financial capacity to pay civil servants. With contradictory economic policies by both sides, the viability of the economy itself is being negatively impacted. As such, we need to advance solutions to resolve this. Madam President, we have noted environmental issues currently ensuing in Yemen, including Ruby Mar case in March on the Red Sea. The briefing from the civil society today also helped us understand the imminent missions we should take in Yemen. Environmental issues cannot be lessened by excluding key civil society stakeholders, and also it needs cooperation from the international community. We commend the UN in dispatching its experts of examining the sunken Ruby Mar. Member states and the UN should maintain sharp focus on the environmental issues ensuing in Yemen continuously. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Special Envoy Grunberg and OCHA Director Worsening and Ms. Shakir for your briefings. I also welcome the Permanent Representative of Yemen to this meeting. At the outset, I would like to congratulate His Excellency Sheikh Mohsen Al-Zindani on his appointment as Yemen's Foreign Minister. We welcome his commitment to Yemen's unity and to reviving a UN-led Yemeni political process that consults civil society and is aimed at bringing the Yemen conflict to an end. The Houthis' reckless attacks in the Red Sea and the worsening situation for the Yemeni people caused by Houthi actions continue to be alarming and undermine the prospects for peace in Yemen. U.S. Special Envoy for Yemen, Lenderking, traveled to Saudi Arabia and Oman earlier this month to continue the United States' intensive diplomatic efforts to halt the attacks in the Red Sea. In addition to the impacts on global shipping, these continued Houthi attacks also impede the delivery of humanitarian assistance to 11.2 million Yemenis and to people in dire need in other countries. Tightening supplies and skyrocketing freight and insurance prices translate directly into rising costs for the Yemeni people. In carrying out these attacks, the Houthis are trying to distract attention from their many failures and human rights abuses, putting their own interests ahead of those of average Yemenis. In addition to the attacks in the Red Sea, attacks on Yemenis are continuing. The Houthis continue to lay siege to the city of Taiz, restricting water access and repeatedly firing sniper rounds into the city, killing and injuring children. We were disturbed by clashes last month in the capital after Houthi forces reportedly forced worshippers at a mosque to listen to their televised propaganda instead of traditional prayers. We were also disturbed by reports that the so-called Houthi courts sentenced 9 people to death earlier this year on dubious charges of sodomy, with punishments including crucifixion and stoning. The group's ongoing, cruel detention of members of vulnerable religious minority communities is unacceptable. Colleagues, the grim reality is that the Houthis are not only willing to condemn millions of men, women, and children in Yemen to hunger to advance their Iran-backed agenda, but they are also willing to use violence and terror for control. We must continue our efforts to demand the Houthis cease their attacks consistent with Resolution 2722. We must also do more to underscore the Council's concern regarding the Iranian origin of weapons used by the Houthis and the ongoing violations of the arms embargo. It is no secret that Iran provides weapons to the Houthis in violation of the UN arms embargo. And so we repeat our call for Iran to stop these illegal weapons transfers and to stop all activities that facilitate the Houthis' reckless attacks. Iran's continuous efforts to foment instability and terror in the region, as demonstrated through this weekend's unprecedented attacks by Iran against the State of Israel, need to be strongly condemned by this Council. Madam President, the United States reiterates its request that the Secretary General's monthly report submitted to the Council in accordance with Resolution 2722 include information regarding the types of weapons used in each incident and, where appropriate, the likely origin of these weapons. Ongoing violations should not be tolerated. Member states should identify and designate violators for sanctions, and the Security Council should strengthen existing mechanisms and authorities to address escalating violence in the Red Sea. We look forward to continued discussions about the ways to strengthen UNVIM's capacity to inspect vessels bound for Houthi-controlled ports to ensure compliance with the arms embargo and prevent the import of weapons. We also look forward to the Yemen panel of experts' upcoming report and hope to address their findings and recommendations in a future meeting. Despite these regional and domestic challenges, we continue to believe that negotiations toward an inclusive Yemeni peace process under UN auspices ultimately remain the best path to stability, one that we hope could lead to a durable end to the conflict while addressing Yemeni calls for justice, accountability, and redress for human rights abuses and violations. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States. I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Je remercie l'envoyé spécial Hans Grunberg et la directrice pour les opérations et le plaidoyer d'OCHA et d'Envoy de leurs exposés. Et je souhaite également la bienvenue à Madame Vamet Shakir et salue son engagement résolu en faveur de la population yéménite. Madame la Présidente, le 26 mars dernier, une soixantaine d'organisations de la société civile nous rappelaient à travers un communiqué que 4 Yéménites sur 5 étaient actuellement 35
confrontés à la
Yemenis
pauvreté.
are currently
Il s'agit d'une
experiencing
situation
poverty.
vécue par
This is a
Entisar
situation
Kara, une
experienced
femme de
by
35
Entisar
ans,
Kara, a
originaire d'Al-Sawad,
35-year-old
dans
woman
le
from
gouvernorat
Al-Sawad
de Damar.
in the governorate of
Malgré les
Damar.
nombreux obstacles
Despite
qui
the
jalonnent son
many
quotidien,
obstacles in her daily life,
Entisar assure
Entisar
qu'elle ne
assures
cessera,
us
je
that
cite,
she will, and I
jamais
quote,
d'aspirer à une
never
vie
stop
meilleure.
striving for
Faisant
a
écho
better
à ces
life.
paroles empreintes
Echoing these
d'optimisme, la
optimistic
Suisse
words,
souhaite mettre en avant les
Switzerland
éléments
wishes to
suivants.
highlight the following points.
Premièrement, nous
Firstly,
appelons à la
we
préservation
call
des
for
acquis
the
dans les discussions de
preservation
paix au
of
Yémen
gains
et
made in the
réaffirmons
peace talks in
l'importance
Yemen.
qu'elles se
We reaffirm the
concrétisent
importance
rapidement.
of these talks
Les
being
parties
brought
doivent
to a rapid and
s'abstenir de
concrete
toutes actions
fruition.
pouvant mettre
The
en
parties
péril
must
la mise
refrain
en
from
œuvre de
any
la feuille de
actions that
route,
could
y
jeopardize
compris
the
les
implementation
mesures
of the
financières
roadmap,
affectant la
including
santé économique
financial
du pays.
measures affecting the
Nous
country's economic
réaffirmons à cet
health.
égard
In this
l'importance de
regard, we
l'exercice des droits et des libertés
reaffirm
de
the
navigation en
importance
mer
of the
Rouge.
exercise of the rights
Nous
and freedoms of
condamnons toute
navigation in the Red
attaque contre
Sea.
des navires
We
marchands
condemn all
et
attacks
appelons à
on
la
merchant
libération
vessels.
immédiate
We
des
call
25
for the
membres
immediate release of
d'équipage
the
du Galaxy
25
Leader.
crew members
Les
of the
crimes
Galaxy
récemment
Leader. The
perpétrés à
crimes
Rada
recently
attestent
perpetrated in
du prix
Rada
élevé
attest to
payé
the
par la
high
population civile
price
en
paid by
raison de cette spirale
civilians
conflictuelle.
as a consequence of
En
this
outre,
conflict
nous
spiral.
souhaitons réitérer notre appel
Furthermore,
lancé hier
we
dans
wish
cette
to
enceinte.
reiterate the appeal
La
we made
spirale de
yesterday in this
l'escalade doit
chamber.
s'arrêter immédiatement.
Namely, the
Toutes les
spiraling
attaques
escalation
doivent
must stop
cesser, tant en
immediately.
mer Rouge
All
et qu'au
attacks
Yémen.
must
La
stop both
région
in the
ne doit
Red
pas
Sea and
sombrer
in
dans un
Yemen.
conflit
The
encore plus
region
vaste et
must not
meurtrier.
sink
Alors
into
que
an
nous sommes
even
face à une
broader and
situation
deadlier
humanitaire
conflict
catastrophique à
at a
Gaza.
time when we are
La
facing a
désescalade doit
catastrophic
être la
humanitarian
priorité.
situation in Gaza.
Deuxièmement,
De-escalation must be
nous
the
relevons avec
priority.
inquiétude que
Secondly, we
l'environnement
note with
humanitaire au
concern
Yémen
that the
devient
humanitarian
toujours plus
environment in
complexe et
Yemen is
dangereux.
becoming ever more
Nous
complex
saluons
and
dans ce
dangerous.
contexte
In
l'engagement
this
du personnel
context, we
humanitaire
welcome the
et onusien,
commitment of
y compris le
UN and
personnel
humanitarian
national et
personnel,
recruté
including
localement,
national and
et
recruited,
rappelons qu'il est
locally
protégé
recruited
par le
staff.
droit
And we recall that
international
they are
humanitaire.
protected
Nous
under
l'avons entendu à
IHL.
l'instant
As
par
we have just
l'intermédiaire de la
heard
haute
from the High
représentante d'OCHA.
Representative of
La
OCHA,
situation
the
économique au
economic
Yémen
situation
a de
in
graves
Yemen is
répercussions
having
sur la
grave
sécurité
repercussions
alimentaire
on
et la
food
malnutrition.
security and
Nous ne pouvons
malnutrition.
pas rester les
We
bras
cannot
croisés.
stand idly
Enfin,
by.
nous nous inquiétons de la
Finally, we are
recrudescence des
concerned
cas
by
de
the
choléra
uptick
et
in
rappelons
cholera
l'importance
cases.
d'investir dans
We
des projets
reiterate the importance
d'assainissement.
of investments in sanitation
Troisièmement,
projects.
le changement
Third,
climatique
climate
aggrave les
change is
vulnérabilités sociales
exacerbating
et
the social and
politiques qui
political
affectent déjà le Yémen.
vulnerabilities
Les
already
catastrophes
afflicting Yemen.
naturelles ont
Natural
poussé plus de
disasters
700
have
000 personnes
displaced
à se
more than
déplacer depuis 2008,
700,000
contribuant ainsi
people
à
since
augmenter les tensions
2008,
autour de l'eau,
thereby
la
increasing
nourriture ou les services
tensions
de
around
base
water,
dans les
food,
régions
and
d'accueil.
basic services
Une étude
in
récente
host
d'une
regions.
ONG
A
yéménite
recent study
financée
by
par
a
la
Yemeni
Suisse
from
a
a Yemeni
démontré que
NGO
plus de la
financed
moitié
by
des
Switzerland
personnes déjà
has
déplacées
shown that more than
ont dû
half of the
changer
people
d'abri à cause des
already
catastrophes
displaced have
naturelles.
had to change
De plus, les
shelter because
facteurs
of
de
natural
stress comme les
disasters.
sécheresses
In
et
addition,
inondations
stress factors such
continuent à
as droughts
s'intensifier
and
avec le
floods
changement
continue
climatique,
to intensify
provoquant
with
des
climate
pertes
change,
agricoles
and they
et
are causing
exacerbant l'insécurité
agricultural
des moyens de
losses and
subsistance.
exacerbating
Dans ce
livelihood
contexte, la Suisse
insecurity.
souhaite relever le
Against
rôle
this
essentiel
backdrop,
joué
we
par
wish
les
to
femmes
highlight
dans
the critical
l'atténuation
role
des
played by
tensions liées
women
aux ressources
in
naturelles.
alleviating
Le
tensions
Conseil doit
linked to
soutenir ces
natural
efforts dans
resources.
le
The
cadre de son
Council should
mandat et
support
s'assurer de
these
la bonne
efforts within the
collaboration
framework
entre
of
les
its
entités
mandate and
onusiennes
ensure
présentes au
smooth
Yémen.
cooperation between the
Madame
UN
la
entities
Présidente, le
present in
tableau
Yemen.
qui nous a été
Madam
dressé
President,
aujourd'hui
the
doit
picture
nous
that has been
inviter à
painted
redoubler
today should
d'efforts.
encourage
La
us to
population
redouble
yéménite peut
our
compter sur le
efforts.
plein
The
soutien
Yemeni
de
people
la
can
Suisse.
count
Je
on the
vous
full
remercie.
support of Switzerland.
I
Thank
thank
you.
the representative of Switzerland, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President.
Agradezco la información proporcionada
I
por los
welcome the
ponentes y
information
doy la
provided
bienvenida
by the
al representante
briefers, and
permanente
I
de Yemen a
welcome
esta
the
sesión.
permanent representative of Yemen to this
El Ecuador
meeting.
sigue con preocupación el
Ecuador remains
impacto que el
concerned
escalamiento de
about
las
the
hostilidades en
impact
el
which
Mar
the
Rojo
escalation
tiene
of
en la
hostilities in the
situación
Red Sea
humanitaria en Yemen,
has on the
considerada
humanitarian
como una de las
situation
mayores
in Yemen,
crisis a nivel global.
considered to be one of the
Como lo ha
largest
advertido la
global
FAO,
crises.
en el reporte
As
reciente,
FAO warned
de
in a recent
mantenerse la
report,
irrupción del transporte
if
marítimo en el
maritime
Mar Rojo,
transportation in
la
the Red
situación de
Sea
inseguridad
continues to be
alimentaria en Yemen,
disrupted,
en donde
the
5 millones
food
de personas
insecurity
ya sufren
situation in
inseguridad
Yemen, where
alimentaria aguda,
5 million people are
continuará
already suffering
deteriorándose.
from acute food insecurity, will continue
A ello
to
se suma el
worsen.
impacto del cambio climático
In
y los
addition to
efectos de
that,
las
we have the
operaciones
impact of
militares
climate change
que pueden
and the
provocar
impact
la
of military
destrucción de
operations, which
infraestructuras,
could lead to the
incluidos
destruction
puertos
of
e instalaciones de
infrastructure, including
almacenamiento, lo que
ports and
obstaculizará
storage
la
facilities.
distribución y el
This will
almacenamiento de
hamper the
alimentos.
distribution and the
Señora
storage
Presidenta,
of food.
el
Madam
conflicto en el Mar
President,
Rojo
the
no solo
conflict in the
amenaza
Red
con
Sea is
revertir
not
los
only
limitados avances que se había
threatens to
logrado en la
reverse the limited progress
restauración de los
achieved in
medios de vida
restoring
de los
the
yemeníes,
livelihoods of
sino que
Yemenis,
también podría
but
alterar la
it
voluntad de
could
las partes
also
para avanzar en
impact
el
the will of
proceso
the
de paz.
parties to
Si bien las hostilidades
pursue
se han
the peace
mantenido en niveles
process.
relativamente
While
bajos, en
hostilities
los
have
últimos
remained at
meses se han
relatively low
registrado
levels,
enfrentamientos y
in
movimientos de
recent
tropas
months,
en
clashes
distintas
and troop
regiones del
movements
país.
have been seen in
Las
various
partes
regions of
también
the
continúan
country. The
amenazando
parties also
públicamente con
continue
volver a la guerra.
publicly to threaten a return to
No
war.
podemos esperar hasta que se
We
produzca una
cannot
escalada de
wait
los combates
until
internos.
an escalation
Debemos
of
demostrar que
internal
este Consejo
fighting
mantiene una
happens.
posición
We must
unificada
show
de
that this
respaldo
Council remains
en torno al
united
proceso de
in
paz,
supporting the peace
así como
process,
coordinar esfuerzos para
as well as in
reducir las
coordinating
tensiones.
efforts to reduce
Es por ello que mi
tensions.
país
For that
reitera la
reason, my
necesidad de
country
implementar la
reiterates the
resolución
need to implement
2722,
Resolution
cuyo pilar
2722,
fundamental es la
whose fundamental
cesación de los
pillar is
ataques
the
en contra de las
cessation of
embarcaciones
attacks
comerciales por los
against
Houthis,
commercial
que no
vessels
tienen
by
justificación
Houthis.
ni legitimidad
These
alguna.
attacks have no
Es
justification or
fundamental además
legitimacy
salvaguardar los
whatsoever.
avances logrados para
We
alcanzar un
must also
acuerdo que
safeguard
siente
progress
las bases
achieved
del fin
in
del
reaching
conflicto
an agreement,
y
laying the
continuar
foundation for
respaldando
an
la
end to the
labor de
conflict,
mediación
and
del
we
enviado
must
especial
continue to
Grunberg,
support the
que enfrenta
mediation efforts
crecientes
of
desafíos.
Special Envoy Grunberg,
Mi
who is
delegación
facing
apoya
growing
las gestiones que el
challenges.
enviado
My
especial lleva
delegation
adelante para
supports the
mantener el apoyo
actions of the
regional
Special
e
Envoy
internacional a la
to
implementación de la
maintain
hoja de ruta,
regional and
así como de
international support for the
mantener
implementation of
los
the
canales
roadmap,
de
as well as in
comunicación abiertos
keeping
con
channels
todos los
of
actores.
communication open with all actors.
Para finalizar,
In conclusion,
Ecuador alienta
Ecuador
aún más a
encourages
continuar
UNMAS to
cooperando con la
continue to
UNMA y
cooperate
el PNUD en la ubicación y
UNMA
desactivación de
and
minas
UNDP
terrestres y
in
restos
locating
explosivos
and
diseminados en
deactivating
Yemen,
landmines
que
and
representan un
explosive
peligro
remnants
latente
scattered
para la
throughout
población
Yemen.
civil,
These are a latent
particularmente
danger for the
para
civilian
mujeres y
population,
niños en zonas
particularly for
rurales.
women and
Muchas
children
gracias.
in rural areas. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador, and I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. We appreciate Special Envoy Grunberg and Director Vosornu for their informative briefings. Our appreciation also goes to Ms. Shakir for her briefing on especially the impacts on climate change in Yemen. Today, I wish to address 3 points. First, on the ongoing threats to maritime security by the Houthis, Japan welcomes the Security Council press statement issued last month in which the 15 Council members spoke out in one voice that the Houthis' attacks on vessels are unacceptable. Unfortunately, however, the Houthis are continuing their dangerous military activities and disrupting the free and safe navigation on international shipping and global economy. Moreover, the Houthis are still detaining 25 innocent multinational crew members together with the Japanese-operated vessel Galaxy Leader. Nearly 150 days have passed since they have illegally seized by the Houthis. Once again, Japan strongly demands that the Houthis comply with this Council's repeated warnings, including in Resolution 2722, immediately cease their reckless conduct and release the Galaxy Leader and its crew. The Council members should remain united to tackle this challenge to our vitally important shipping lanes, a global problem affecting all of us. Madam President, second, the security situation in Yemen, Japan would like to reiterate its unwavering support to the work of the Special Envoy towards bringing lasting peace in Yemen. However, Japan regrets to see increased military campaign by the Houthis against the government of Yemen forces, which recently led to exchange to fire that resulted many deaths and injuries. We are also concerned about the Houthis' hostile economic measures against the government of Yemen that are undermining a conducive environment for peace talks. We sincerely hope that the parties will engage constructively under the auspices of the United Nations. In this context, it is essential to secure the full, equal, safe, and meaningful participation of women in the peace process. Third, on the humanitarian front, Director Vosolnu reminded us that more must be done to save the people of Yemen from the multifaceted crisis, including malnutrition and the spread of epidemics. The already dire humanitarian situation is being amplified by climate change. Japan calls for the international community to increase assistance to alleviate the plight of Yemenis, particularly women and children. In this regard, we should continue to urge the Houthis
to lift the restrictions on women's freedom of movement, which negatively impact women's daily lives and curtail the ability of female aid workers. To conclude, Japan calls on all parties to work towards peace and stability in Yemen and beyond. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Madam President, I thank all the briefers for their briefings. At present, the situation in Yemen remains complex and daunting. All parties concerned should adhere to the general direction of political settlement, remove interference, move towards each other, and work together to promote a comprehensive political process that is Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned. We urge all parties in Yemen to exercise restraint, avoid provoking an escalation of the situation, and to create a favorable atmosphere for the political process. China supports the efforts of Special Envoy Grunberg and expect all parties, in particular countries with influence on the situation in Yemen, to play a constructive role. China is concerned about tensions in the Red Sea and reiterates its call on the Houthis to respect the right of commercial vessels of all countries to navigate in the waters of the Red Sea in accordance with the international law and to cease immediately relevant attacks. We call on the parties concerned to exercise restraint and refrain from actions that might exacerbate tensions. China reiterates that the Security Council has never authorized any country to use force against Yemen and that no country should misinterpret or abuse international law and Security Council resolutions. Alleviating the humanitarian crisis in Yemen is a shared task of the international community. The conflict in Yemen has lasted for 9 years, causing massive destruction of infrastructure, including hospitals and schools, more than 4/5 of the country's population living in poverty, and more than 4.5 million school-aged children unable to attend school. China calls on the international community to increase its investment in Yemen's humanitarian and development efforts and looks forward to the early resumption of assistance program by the WFP in northern Yemen. Madam President, the tensions in the Red Sea are a visible manifestation of the spillover effects of the Gaza conflict, despite the adoption of the Security Council Resolution 2728, which explicitly demands a ceasefire. The fighting continued unabated through the end of Ramadan, and the threat to regional peace and stability continues to grow. Israel should fulfill in good faith its obligations and the member states of the UN and fully implement the demands of the Council resolutions by immediately ceasing its military attacks on Gaza and seizing its collective punishment of the Palestinian people. China supports the Security Council in taking further action in light of the developments on the ground. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of China, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam President. We are thankful to Special Envoy, Mr. Hans Grunberg, as well as the OCHA Director of Operations and Advocacy, Madam Edem for the report on the political and humanitarian situations in the country. We have taken note of the briefing from Madam Shakir. The Russian Federation continues to seek to persuade all stakeholders involved in the Yemeni paradigm to help facilitate the establishment in that country of a sustained ceasefire regime and the restoration of normal life. We extend our full support for the efforts of Mr. Grunberg, efforts which are geared towards achievement of those goals and the eventual launch of a full-fledged, inclusive, nationwide dialogue under the aegis of the United Nations. Once again, we draw attention to the need for the renewal of the patently obsolete international legal basis for Yemeni settlement, which clearly no longer reflects realities on the ground. There is a need to urgently address also the deteriorating humanitarian situation in the country. Approximately 18 million Yemeni people need humanitarian assistance. That is nearly half of the country's population. We are receiving alarming reports about the outbreak of cholera. Cholera is a disease which can easily be basically treated with the presence of basic medicines, and yet there is a catastrophic shortage of such medication in Yemen. We stress that Yemeni people, irrespective of where they reside, need to have unfettered access
to food, medicines, and other necessities.
Тревожит нас и ситуация
We are also alarmed by the
Йемена
situation
акваториях,
in the
включая
waters
Красное море.
surrounding Yemen. This includes the Red Sea.
Россия
The
последовательно
Russian Federation
выступает
has
за
consistently
обеспечение
advocated
безопасного и свободного
for the
судоходства в этом
safe
районе.
and free navigation in those waters and
Мы
region. We
последовательно осуждаем
consistently
атаки на
condemn
мирные корабли,
attacks on
представляющие
civilian
угрозу их
vessels
экипажам и
which
грузам.
pose threats to
В
their
частности,
crews and
нападение
cargo,
на судно
specifically the
True
attack on the
Confidence,
True
повлекшее за
Confidence,
собой гибель членов
which
экипажа.
resulted in the deaths of crew
Требуем
members.
немедленного
We
освобождения
demand the
судна
immediate
Galaxy Leader
release
и
of
его
Galaxy
команды.
Leader, crew members, and the vessel itself.
В контактах с
In our
представителями
contacts
Ансар
with
Аллах
representatives of
повторяем
Ansar Allah,
призыв
we
немедленно прекратить
reiterate our
подобные
call for
действия
an
и
immediate end
переключить
to such
внимание
actions and
на
for attention
достижение
to
мира
shift
внутри самого
to the
Йемена.
achievement of peace within Yemen itself.
Однако надо
However,
понимать,
one
что
must
первопричина этой
understand that the
ситуации
root cause of
продолжение
the
Израилем
situation
кровопролития в
is the
секторе Газа,
ongoing bloodshed by
нарушение
Israel
резолюции
in the
Совета
Gaza Strip
Безопасности ООН
in breach of
2728.
Security Council Resolution 2728.
Это чудовищная
This is
эскалация,
a
стоившая
horrific
жизни более
escalation which
33
claimed the lives of
тысячам
more than
мирных палестинцев, самым
33,000
серьезным образом
peaceful
резонирует на всем Ближнем
Palestinians
Востоке,
with grave
сказываясь в том
repercussions throughout the
числе и на
entire
регионе
Middle
Красного
East,
моря.
including repercussions in the Red Sea
Прекращение
region.
насилия в зоне
An end to the
Палестино-израильского
violence in the
конфликта – ключ
Palestine-Israel
к спокойствию
conflict
и там.
zone is key to tranquility and calm in
Отмечаем
the
и
Red Sea as
деструктивную
well.
роль
We also note
самопровозглашенной
the
коалиции во
destructive
главе
role of the
США и Великобритании,
self-proclaimed
продолжающей
coalition helmed by
еженедельно
the United
совершать
States and
атаки
the
по
United
йеменской
Kingdom. They
территории.
continue to carry out on a weekly basis
Отсутствие
attacks on
эффекта на
Yemeni
земле
soil.
и
The
очевидная
absence of results on the
неспособность
ground
подорвать
and their
военный потенциал
blatant
хуситов
inability to
Вашингтон и Лондон не
thwart
останавливают.
the military capabilities of the Houthis is something which has
Вновь
not
подчеркиваем,
stopped
что
Washington or
ракетно-бомбовые
London.
удары
Once
западной
again, we
коалиции
stress
ведомой
that
США
missile
территорию
and bomb
суверенного
attacks by
Йемена
the Western
категорически
U.S.-led coalition
неприемлемы,
targeting the
равно
sovereign
как и
territory
попытки
of Yemen
оправдать
are
агрессию резолюции
categorically
Совета
unacceptable.
Безопасности
Also unacceptable
2722
are attempts to
или
justify
ссылками
the
на
aggression
право
with
на
resolution
самооборону по статье
2722
51
or to
Устава
justify
ООН.
this with references to the right to self-defense
Подобные
under
действия
chapter
наносят ущерб
under Article
внутриеменскому
51 of the UN
регулированию,
Charter.
подрывая
These are
усилия
actions which
международных и региональных
undermine
посредников.
internal resolution in Yemen and thwart the efforts of
По
international
сути,
and
во
regional
многом именно
mediators.
из-за подобного
In
порочного
essence,
круга
largely
эскалации
thanks as a
йеменского регулирования
consequence of this
поставлено
kind
на
of a
вынужденную
vicious
паузу.
cycle of escalation, Yemeni settlement has
Более того, в
been
условиях
forced to
отсутствия
come to a
формального перемирия
pause.
между сторонами может
Furthermore,
произойти и
in the
деградация
absence of a
ситуации.
formal truce between the parties,
Как нам
the
сегодня
situation may
сообщил
further
господин
deteriorate.
Грунберг,
As Mr. Grunberg reported to us today,
боестолкновения между йеменскими
the
сторонами по линии
clashes and
фронта
hostilities
участились.
among the Yemeni
Эта
parties
опасная
on the
тенденция
front line
способна
have become
привести к новому
increasingly
витку
frequent.
напряженности
This
внутри
is a
страны.
dangerous trend which is liable to result in further escalation of tensions within the country.
При этом
At the
отмечаем, что в
same time,
последнее
we
время,
note that recently,
очевидно,
clearly,
поняв тщетность
having
избранной силовой линии,
grasped the
США стали все
futility
чаще
of
рассуждать о
opting for military
необходимости
action, the United
деэскалации
States has
и жестов доброй
has
воли.
begun increasingly expatiating
Это
on the
вселяет
need to
определенный оптимизм.
de-escalate and for the need for actions and gestures of goodwill. This
Россия с самого
instills a certain
начала
degree of
йеменского
optimism.
конфликта
From the very
последовательно
beginning of the
подчеркивала,
Yemeni
что решить
conflict,
его
Russia
можно
has consistently
исключительно
stressed the following.
политико-дипломатическим
The way to
способом, на
resolve it
основе
is
принципа
exclusively
инклюзивности,
through political diplomatic means on the basis
подразумевающего
of the
участие
principle
всех
of
йеменских
inclusivity,
протагонистов, включая
which
Ансар
entails
Аллах.
the participation of all Yemeni protagonists, including Ansar Allah.
Госпожа председатель,
Madam President,
с большим сожалением узнали, что
it
США
was with
все-таки
great
завершили передачу
regret that we
захваченных
learned
ими
that the
в
U.S. has
Оманском заливе
concluded the transfer
вооружений и
of the
боеприпасов
weapons
в
and
зону
munitions they
конфликта на Украине.
seized in the Gulf of Oman, and they transferred them to the
Хотели
conflict
бы в
zone
этой
in
связи напомнить,
Ukraine.
что
In this
какого-либо
regard, we wish to
особого
recall
инспекционного
the
режима по
following.
досмотру судов в
Any
международных
specific
водах в
inspections
йеменском
regime
контексте не
to
существует.
inspect vessels
И
in
подобные
international
действия
seas in the
резолюции
Yemeni context does not
2216, на
exist.
которую ссылается
And
США, не
these kinds of
предусмотрены.
actions are not provided for under Resolution
Осуждаем
2216, to
расширительное
which the
трактование
U.S.
положений
refers.
профильных
We
резолюций Совета
condemn the broad
Безопасности ООН по
interpretation of
Йемену,
the
в том числе
provisions of
санкционных.
specific Security Council resolutions on
Рассматриваем
Yemen,
санкционный
including
режим
sanctions
Совета в качестве
resolutions. We
вспомогательного
view the
механизма
sanctions regime of the
политического
Council as a
регулирования, а
subsidiary
не средство
regime,
наказания.
a subsidiary mechanism for political settlement,
Подобные
not as a
безответственные действия
means for
свидетельствуют о том,
doling out
что в
punishment.
Вашингтоне
These kinds
по-прежнему
of reckless
стремятся навязывать
actions show that Washington continues to strive to impose on the whole world its so-called rules-based order, where the rules are formulated and adapted to be reflected to advance their needs by the United States and their allies. Nothing good for peace and security on our planet will come of such egotistical intractability and unwillingness to act in accordance with the norms of international law. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation and I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci Madame la Présidente.
Thank you,
Je
Madam
remercie les
President. I would
intervenants
like to
de
thank
leur exposé.
the briefers.
La région a
for
connu
their
un développement majeur dans la nuit du
briefings.
13 au 14 avril,
The
avec
region has
l'attaque sans
seen a
précédent
major
menée par
development
l'Iran et ses
on
proxys
from
contre Israël.
the 13th to the 14th
La
in the
France la
evening with the
condamne avec la plus grande
unprecedented
fermeté.
attack carried out by Iran
Cette
and its
attaque constitue
proxies against
évidemment une
Israel.
menace sérieuse et
France
majeure à
condemns
la
this
paix et la
attack in the
sécurité
strongest
internationale,
terms. Obviously,
et en
it is a
particulier
serious and
à la
major threat
stabilité et la
to
sécurité de
international
la
peace
région.
and security and to the
La France
stability
exprime
and
sa
security of the
solidarité avec le
region.
peuple
France
israélien et
expresses
rappelle
its
son attachement à
solidarity
la
with the
sécurité
Israeli
d'Israël,
people and
de nos
calls its
partenaires
commitment
et à
to
la
the
stabilité
security of
régionale.
Israel, of our partners and
Le rapport
regional
du secrétaire
stability.
général le montre, les attaques
The
menées par les
SG's
Houthis en
report
mer
bears
Rouge et
out
dans
the
le golfe
fact that
d'Aden
the
se
Houthi attacks
poursuivent
in the Red
malgré les
Sea
mises en
and the
garde
Gulf
qui leur
of
sont
Aden
adressées par ce Conseil.
continue despite the warnings
La France
of
condamne
by
fermement
this
les
council.
attaques conduites par les
France
Houthis depuis plusieurs
firmly
mois.
condemns the
Elles portent
attacks
atteinte
carried
aux
out by
droits
the
et libertés
Houthis
de
over the past
navigation,
several months.
déstabilisent le
They
Yémen et
infringe
la
on the
région
rights and
et
freedoms
nuisent
of
aux intérêts des
navigation,
pays de la région
destabilize
ainsi
Yemen
que
and
de
the
l'ensemble
region,
des pays
and
bénéficiant du commerce
adversely
international qui
impact the
transitent par cette
interests
zone.
of the countries of the
Les
region,
impacts sur le
as
plan
well as all
environnemental
of
et
the countries
humanitaire sont
benefiting from
préoccupants.
international trade
Nous appelons
transiting
les
this
Houthis
zone.
à libérer
The impacts, the
immédiatement le
environmental
Galaxy
and
Leader et son
humanitarian
équipage
impacts are
retenus depuis
disturbing. We
novembre
remind
2023.
Houthis to
Nous
freely
sommes également
to
préoccupés par les
release
informations
immediately the
indiquant que les
Galaxy
Houthis
Leader and
ont
its crew
participé à
held
l'attaque de
since
l'Iran
November
contre Israël dans la nuit
2023.
du
We are
13 au
also
14
concerned
avril.
about the information
Face au
indicating
comportement
that Houthis
irresponsable des
participated in the
Houthis, la
Iranian
France
attack
poursuit son
against Israel
engagement dans le
on the
cadre de
13th.
l'opération européenne
Given
Aspide
the
pour
irresponsible behavior
garantir
of
la
the Houthis,
sûreté
France
maritime
will
et la liberté de
remain committed
navigation
to the
conformément au
Aspides
droit
European
international et
operation
en
to
lien avec ses
guarantee
partenaires.
maritime safety and the
La
freedom of
résolution
navigation in
2722
accordance with
rappelle que
international law
l'exercice des
and
droits et
working with our
libertés de
partners.
navigation doit être
Resolution
respecté et que
2722
les
recalls
États
the
ont,
fact
en
that
accord avec le droit
exercising
international,
the
le
rights
droit
and
de
freedoms of
défendre leurs
navigation
navires
must
contre
be
les attaques.
respected, and in
Elle doit
accordance with
être pleinement
international law,
appliquée.
states must have the right to
Madame la
defend their
Présidente,
vessels against
au
attack.
plan sécuritaire,
That
il faut
resolution must be
transformer la
fully
trêve de facto
implemented.
en une cessation
Madam
complète
President,
et
on
durable
the
des
security front,
hostilités pour
we
éviter toute
must
reprise du conflit sur le
transform
terrain.
this de facto truce into a
La
complete and
situation
lasting
humanitaire est catastrophique
cessation
et
of
s'est dégradée au
hostilities
cours
to
des
avoid
derniers
any
mois.
resumption of conflict on the
L'insécurité en
ground.
mer Rouge
The
et dans le
humanitarian
golfe
situation
d'Aden
is
a des
catastrophic and
conséquences
has
sur le coût
worsened
des
in recent
opérations
months.
humanitaires et les
Insecurity in the
approvisionnements,
Red Sea and in the Gulf
alors
of
même que
Aden
les
has
financements manquent.
consequences on the cost of
Il est
humanitarian
également
operations and
essentiel
supplies.
que les Houthis cessent de
And funding
déstabiliser
is
l'économie du
insufficient.
Yémen
It is
et
also
de mener une
essential
guerre
for the Houthis
économique
to
contre le
cease
gouvernement.
destabilizing the Yemeni
Leur
economy
attitude
and
irresponsable
causing
contribue à
an economic
l'appauvrissement de la
war against the
population.
government. Their irresponsible
La France
attitude
condamne
has
l'émission de
led to the
monnaie contrefaite
impoverishment
par
of the
les Houthis
population,
et
and
soutient la Banque
France
centrale
also
du
condemns
Yémen
the
basée à
issuance
Aden
of counterfeit
dans sa
currency
mission
by
de
the
garantie de
Houthis,
la
and
stabilité
we
du
support the
secteur
Central
financier du
Bank of
pays.
Yemen based in Aden
Nous
in
devons
its mission
rester
to
collectivement
guarantee
mobilisés
the
pour répondre
stability
aux
of the
besoins des
country's
populations
financial
civiles au
sector.
Yémen.
Together, we
L'insécurité
must
alimentaire
stand
touche
ready to meet
70%
the
des
needs
enfants
of
de
the
moins de 2
civilians
ans.
in
C'est leur
Yemen. Food
développement qui est donc en
insecurity
jeu.
impacts 70%
Nous
of
sommes aussi
children under the
préoccupés par
age of
l'épidémie
2.
de choléra
The very
qui se
development is at stake, and we are
répand dans
also
tout le pays.
concerned about the cholera epidemic
Pour faire
spreading
face à
throughout the
cette
country.
situation,
To
il est
address this
essentiel de garantir
situation, we
tous les
must
accès
guarantee
nécessaires
all
et
necessary
essentiel que les
access, and
travailleurs
humanitarian
humanitaires
workers
puissent
must be
exercer
able
leur
to
mission
carry out
sans
their
entrave,
missions
notamment
without
les
hindrance,
personnels
in
féminins en
particular
zone Houthi.
female staff in Houthi
Nous
regions.
exprimons par ailleurs notre
Moreover, we
préoccupation
express our
face à la
concern at
multiplication
the
des arrestations
increase
et
in
des exactions
arrests
commises
and
par les Houthis contre la
abuses committed
population,
by Houthis
à
against the
l'image de la destruction
population.
brutale de maisons à
We've
Rada
seen
le mois
images
dernier,
of the brutal
qui a
destruction
causé
of
la mort
homes
de
in
plusieurs
Rada
de leurs
last
habitants,
month,
dont des
which
femmes
led to the
et des
death
enfants.
of several inhabitants,
La
including
France
women and
soutient les
children.
mécanismes onusiens qui
France
agissent en
supports
faveur d'une
UN
plus grande
mechanisms
stabilité et
for
sécurité
greater
au Yémen,
stability and security in Yemen,
qui contribue à la lutte contre les trafics d'armes en mer Rouge. Grâce aux inspections qu'il mène, il crée la confiance et facilite les importations commerciales et l'acheminement de l'aide humanitaire au Yémen. Il doit être renforcé et mieux financé. Nous devons aussi soutenir par des actions concrètes les efforts de réforme du gouvernement du Yémen et lui donner les moyens d'exercer à nouveau sa souveraineté sur l'ensemble du pays. Enfin, la France réitère son plein soutien à l'envoyé spécial et à ses efforts pour définir et mettre en œuvre une feuille de route politique inclusive. Nous appelons les Houthis à cesser leurs attaques et à choisir la voie du processus de paix sous l'égide de l'envoyé spécial. La France salue la mobilisation à ce sujet de l'Arabie saoudite, d'Oman, ainsi que d'autres acteurs régionaux. La participation effective des femmes yéménites aux négociations politiques doit être garantie. La France continuera sa mobilisation en ce sens. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France. I will now make a statement in my national capacity. I thank Special Envoy Grunberg and OCHA Director Vosurno for their comprehensive briefings, and Ms. Shaki for her strong testimony today. The 9-year conflict in Yemen has created dire humanitarian conditions for Yemeni civilians. More than 17.5 million people face acute food insecurity, with numbers likely to increase in the coming months. Earlier, we were reminded how important it is for the international community to scale up support to the humanitarian response plan, this at a time when this plan remains drastically underfunded. The essential delivery of humanitarian aid continues to be hampered due to humanitarian access impediments. Authorities must lift restrictions on women's freedom of movement. These restrictions exacerbate gender inequality and structural barriers hindering access to education, healthcare, and income for their families. We are concerned for increasing cases of cholera in Yemen and call for rapid, robust response by the international community. Malta is concerned that space for mediation efforts remain constrained due to escalations in the Red Sea and the region. We call on the Houthis to immediately cease all attacks and actions against commercial shipping and abide by their obligations under international law, including full adherence to Resolution 2722. Recent skirmishes in Yemen, including in Laj and Marib, also reflect the tenuous security situation. On the socio-economic front, the decision by the Houthis to issue new currency is concerning. Unilateral decisions that deepen the fragmentation of Yemen's already weakened economy only harms the well-being of Yemenis. We call on parties to de-escalate tensions and prioritize dialogue to find an agreement that will lead to sustainable peace. The establishment of a UN roadmap will be crucial to ensure the implementation of a nationwide ceasefire and inclusive Yemeni-led and owned political process under UN auspices. Women must be full, equal and meaningful participants in all diplomatic efforts to find peace. And as has been highlighted again today by Ms. Shakir, we must not forget that Yemen is the third country most susceptible to climate-related impacts and one of the least prepared for climate shocks. According to a recent report by the UN Environmental Programme, environmental stresses such as water scarcity, desertification, and extreme weather events are highly intertwined with security concerns. In 2023, over 3/4 of newly displaced individuals experienced such displacement due to severe weather occurrences. While women in rural communities remain greatly dependent upon agriculture for their livelihoods, we also acknowledge their pivotal role in helping ease tensions over natural resources. Furthermore, through the work of women-led civil society organizations, they help meet the essential needs of communities in remote and front-line areas. The international community should support Yemen to mitigate the effects of the climate crisis. This includes ensuring adequate access to climate financing, assisting national preparatory systems, and invest in climate-resilient measures through effective strategies integrated with conflict prevention efforts. The Security Council needs to recognize this nexus to address the multiple impacts on communities and enhance long-term stability in Yemen. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of Yemen.
Madam President, at the outset, I would like to congratulate you on presiding over the Council for this month. I wish you luck in your endeavors, and I thank your predecessor, the representative of Japan, for their successful presidency during the past month. I would also like to thank Mr. Hans Grunberg and Ms. Adam Wosornu for their briefings, and I thank Ms. Wamid Shakir for her briefing as well. Madam President, a just and permanent peace was and remains the main objective of the Presidential Leadership Council and the Yemeni government. Building peace in Yemen is a Yemeni, regional and international imperative on our path to restore state institutions that would guarantee rights, liberties, justice, and equal citizenship that would make Yemen and the Yemeni people more safe and secure and strengthen their regional and international presence. Restoring state institutions is a main priority and the ultimate goal of any efforts to reach a political settlement without discrimination or exclusion. We need to build a brighter future for the Yemeni people. The Yemeni government once again expresses its openness and welcomes all initiatives and good offices to achieve a comprehensive and sustainable peace based on the national, regional, and international agreed-upon terms of reference of the political settlement, namely the GCC initiative and its implementation mechanism, and the outcomes of the Comprehensive National Dialogue Conference, as well as Security Council resolutions, namely Resolution 2216, which represents a roadmap to address the Yemeni crisis. My government also reaffirms that it supports all regional and international efforts, as well as the efforts of the UN Special Envoy to put an end to this conflict and achieve peace in Yemen. The Yemeni government remains committed to the choice of peace, and we welcomed the truce announcement, and we also welcomed its extension and the widening of its humanitarian benefits to the Yemeni people in the areas under the control of the Houthi militias. We also welcomed the number of measures and arrangements to build trust, which would lead to a proposed roadmap so that we can resume a comprehensive political process and a transitional period towards building peace and state institutions that are democratic and meet the aspirations of the Yemeni people. Despite these efforts of mediation from our brethren in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Sultanate of Oman, however, although we were nearing the signature of a roadmap, the terrorist Houthi militias, as usual, decided to shirk their responsibilities towards peace. They chose to undermine the political process with a destructive and dangerous escalation in the Red Sea under the pretense of assisting the Palestinian people in Gaza. However, time has shown the falsehood of these allegations. These militias destroying homes and killing their residents. These militias laying siege to cities, looting property, terrorizing women and children, killing and kidnapping civilians. These militias could never support just causes. They have multiplied their restrictions and violations, as well as their military escalation at all fronts. Although there's a vulnerable truth, they were unable to honor their obligations because they can only live in a swamp of conflict. Their project is a project of war and destruction. They are not for peace. They cannot live in peace with society. History has shown this time and again. In this regard, I would like to commend the good offices of our brethren in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to address the Yemeni crisis, achieve peace, and alleviate the humanitarian suffering of the Yemeni people. The terrorist Houthi militias continue with their violations and grave crimes against the Yemeni people, the latest of which razing the homes of innocent civilians to the ground in the Rada city in Al-Bayda governorate, killing the residents of these homes. This crime resulted in the killing and injuring of around 35 civilians, mostly women and children. They have killed 9 members of one household. This heinous crime took place during the holy month of Ramadan. This is not an isolated act. This is a part of a long series of brutal crimes committed by these Iranian-backed terrorist militias. This crime is a clear example of how these militias, although they claim that they support the Palestinian people in Gaza, but at the same time, on a daily basis, they perpetrate acts of terrorism, murder, and violations against the Yemeni people. They continue to impose an unjust siege on the city of Ta'az. This has caused endless suffering and humanitarian crises for over 4 million people in this city. They have shirked their responsibilities when it comes to opening roads. They continue to adopt a policy of starvation and collective punishment. They also continue to target cities, villages, and residential areas, as well as the homes of citizens. They've used sniper fire to target innocent civilians, including women and children. They've perpetrated dozens of crimes. They've planted mines that claimed the lives of thousands of civilians. This in blatant violation of the calls of the international community and this council to put an end to this war, to resume the political process and alleviate the suffering of the Yemeni people. The Yemeni government condemns in the strongest terms the crimes of the terrorist Houthi militias. We reaffirm that these crimes have no statute of limitations. We remain committed to restoring state institutions, to imposing security, stability, and to end these terrorist practices against the steadfast Yemeni people. Madam President, the terrorist Houthi militias continue to target oil tankers and commercial vessels in the Red Sea. This shows the disregard of these militias to the environmental impact of any oil spill on the economic and agricultural sectors, the fish, the maritime environment, and biodiversity in Yemen and coastal countries. In this regard, we call on providing the necessary support in order to confront the potential negative impact of the drowning of the Rubimar vessel. We need concerted regional and international efforts to deal with these environmental challenges threatening Yemen and the region so that we can prevent any pollution that would directly threaten the maritime environment in the Red Sea.
تصعيد في البحر الأحمر
Houthi militias continue to escalate in the Red Sea so that they can shirk their responsibility towards peace, to implement the agendas and plans of the Iranian regime in Yemen and the region, to destabilize the region and the world. Once again, we warn against the flow of Iranian weapons to the terrorist Houthi militias in a blatant violation of Security Council resolutions, notably resolutions 2216 and 2140. This could lead to prolonging the conflict in Yemen and worsening of the humanitarian crisis. We have warned early on and on more than one occasion, and before this Council, as well as in the statements of His Excellency Dr. Rishad Al-Alaimi, the President of the Presidential Leadership Council before the General Assembly, we warned against these plans aimed at undermining security and stability in Yemen and the region, and aimed at targeting the safety of international maritime shipping and the free flow of international trade. These attacks in the Red Sea are to implement these plans, and they were going to occur whether or not there was a brutal Israeli aggression against the Gaza Strip. Madam President, the government of Yemen today is adopting the principles of transparency and accountability. We are implementing a number of economic and financial reforms in order to confront the economic and humanitarian challenges as a result of the Houthi militias' war and their escalation and their targeting of vital oil facilities. They have also targeted oil export ports. This has prevented the Yemeni government from re-exporting oil for over a year and a half. This has prevented the Yemeni people from enjoying this important economic resource. This has impacted our state budget and prevented us from paying salaries. It has also increased pressure on the exchange rate of our local currency and has resulted in a number of economic and humanitarian challenges. The Houthi militias are adopting a policy of starvation, and they are launching a systemic economic war against the Yemeni people. We call once again on the international community to support us to confront these challenges and to find means to re-export oil so that we can honor our obligations under these difficult and exceptional conditions. We look forward to the support of the international community to confront these economic and humanitarian challenges to alleviate the suffering of the Yemeni people. We thank our brethren from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates for their support, which greatly contributed to confronting the deficit in our state budget and in overcoming a number of financial difficulties. As part of their economic war against the Yemeni people, the Houthi militias escalated once again against the Yemeni government and the Yemeni people. They have issued a forged currency and imposed its use instead of the official currency in areas under its control, in a blatant violation of all financial and banking laws and norms. We warn against the impact of this irresponsible escalation, for this would lead to confusion and complexion in transactions with citizens and financial institutions inside and outside of Yemen. This would also lead to further division in our Yemeni economy. It will undermine the safety of our banking sector, and it will not serve the cause of peace. My country renews its commitment to cooperating and advancing our partnership and coordination with all UN and relief agencies operating in Yemen. It is important for UN agencies to move their headquarters to the temporary capital of Aden, so that they do not remain under the extortion and terrorism of Houthi militias, and so that they could reach all Yemeni areas without any discrimination. Once again, we reaffirm the need to send humanitarian support funds to the Yemeni Central Bank. This step will contribute to national economy recovery efforts and preserve the value of our currency and improve the living conditions of our citizens. Madam President, we have painted a grim picture of the current humanitarian situation in Yemen. We need more support from the international community to alleviate the suffering of the Yemeni people. In this regard, we look forward to the donor conference in order to mobilize funds for the humanitarian response plan in Yemen for 2024, and we call on sisterly and brotherly countries and international organizations to donate generously to support this plan at scale to meet the current humanitarian needs. We call on the United Nations and the international community to keep the humanitarian situation in Yemen at the top of their list of priorities as humanitarian crises around the world multiply. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representatives of Yemen for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite Council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.